Every story begins with a truth and ends with a heartbeat. I'm Tisha, and I have a story to tell. So kick off your shoes, settle in, and let's begin.
As the first winter snow fell, the old man sat hunched on the sidewalk outside the bakery on 4th Street. His back was curved, his fingers trembling as they clutched at the edges of a once impeccable jacket. The coat, now dull and matted with grime, hung loose on his frail shoulders, the fabric fraying at the cuffs where his bones pressed against the threads. He tugged it tight, but the wind was merciless. It whipped through the streets, sweeping up the skirts of hurried shoppers, and stinging cheeks turned pink with cold. Festive music leaked from shop fronts and church doors, weaving itself into the pulse of the city. Somewhere above the flurry of snow, a choir sang Silent Night, their harmonies pure as the falling flakes. The old man tucked his knees to his chest and wrapped his arms around them. His mismatched boots, one sole held together with duct tape, pressed against the frozen sidewalk. Beneath the concrete, he could feel the slow throb of pain in his joints. People passed, some in pairs, some in family groups, but no one stopped. No one gave the old man a single glance. He watched feet go by, leather boots polished to a shine, children in bright red snow gear, soles crunching over snow. He watched a man juggle 3 shopping bags and laugh as his daughter slipped in the slush. A woman with a candy cane scarf walked briskly past, talking into her phone about roast turkeys and relatives flying in from Vermont. Across the street, a boy, no older than 10, saw a stray dog lingering near a trash bin. With a cruel grin, he kicked at it. The dog yelped and fled, and the boy laughed. The old man's eyes followed the dog until it vanished down an alley. His mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came. His world had shrunk to this: a frigid square of sidewalk beneath a flickering street lamp, a threadbare coat, and silence. He had no memory of who he was before the streets, no recollection of his name, family, or the path that had brought him here. Just fragments, dreams he didn't understand. Sometimes a face would come to him. A woman with long auburn hair, a hand on a swelling belly, a voice saying, "Wait for me." But the moment he opened his eyes, the images slipped through his mind like snow melt through fingers. He had tried to leave the city once, walked until his legs gave out, but there was nowhere to go. The world outside the city didn't see him either. Here, at least, there were warm grates and leftover pastries from the kind girl at the optometry clinic across the street. She always left a paper bag beside him around 7:45 a.m. She never said a word, just a nod and a smile. He didn't know her name, but he waited for her every morning. A soft hush fell over the city as the snow thickened. Car tires hissed on the road, headlights glowing through the flurry. The scent from a street vendor preparing breakfast and buns wafted through the air. Bells jingled, and somewhere a man in a Santa suit shouted holiday greetings and shook a bucket for coins. The old man shifted, pain lancing through his hip. He tried to remember what day it was. But time meant little. It passed without notice. Until today. Today felt different, the snow softer. He looked up. Through the veil of snow, the city lights blurred into stars. In the reflection of a frosted window across the street, he caught a glimpse of something. A memory. A man in a surgeon's coat, laughing, arms wrapped around a pregnant woman. Her auburn hair cascaded down her back as she leaned into him. Then the image vanished. The old man gasped. His breath steamed into the air. He lowered his head again, hugging his knees tighter. Somewhere in the deep folds of his mind, something stirred. A name, but it was gone before he could grasp it. The light in the kitchen flickered as the kettle clicked off. Diana stood at the window, one hand wrapped around a chipped blue mug, the other resting gently on the curve of her stomach. Outside, frost clung to the edges of the glass, fracturing the morning sunlight into scattered diamonds. Her auburn hair was pulled loosely into a braid over one shoulder, and her breath fogged the window pane as she leaned forward. Snowflakes drifted lazily to the ground, and a hush hung over the neighborhood, broken only by the hum of a distant bus and the occasional bark of a dog. Ed walked in, still adjusting his watch. His surgical scrubs were tucked under a heavy black overcoat, and his short black hair was damp from his shower. "Still snowing?" he asked, reaching for his travel mug. "It just started," Diana said. "The baby's kicking. It wants your attention, I think." He smiled and walked over, placing a warm hand on her belly. "Morning, little one," he murmured. Diana laughed softly, her fingers brushing against his. "You'll be late." "Just one more minute." He pressed a kiss to her cheek, then another to her lips. "Be safe, Ed. Roads are going to be awful." He smiled, but there was tension in his eyes. The hospital was short-staffed with all the emergency surgeries and holiday shifts. He hadn't had a full night's sleep in days. He grabbed his keys and scarf. Diana followed him to the door. "Call me later. Always." And with that, he disappeared into the swirling snow. He never came home. Not that night. Neither the next day. At first, Diana tried to stay calm. She called the hospital. They told her Ed had never arrived. She called his phone, and it went straight to voicemail. She drove to his route, scanning the snow-covered streets for tire tracks, skid marks, a broken-down car. Nothing. The city seemed to have swallowed him whole. 2 days later, she filed the report. A missing person. A respected surgeon with no history of mental illness, no debts, and no reason to vanish. The police searched. They reviewed traffic cameras following the route from home to his office, checked hospitals and morgues, and interviewed co-workers, neighbors, anyone who might have seen him. Nothing. The police had no leads, found no footprint in the snow. There was no trace of Ed. It was as if he had stepped through a doorway into another world. Weeks turned into months. The nursery remained untouched. Diana would sit in the rocking chair, staring at the yellow walls and the mobile of tiny birds that swayed gently above the crib. She held on to hope, clung to it until it wore her raw. She gave birth on a rainy spring night, alone in a sterile hospital room. She named the baby Kim, after her grandmother, after hope. Kim had Ed's dark eyes. Diana cried the first time she held her, tears of love and mourning tangled together. She never moved out of the house. She never replaced Ed's coat on the peg by the door. It hung there for years, untouched, a silent reminder. She raised Kim with every ounce of strength she had left. And though the sorrow never left her, she learned to carry it without letting it break her. It was colder than it looked. Ed had decided to take the alley behind the hospital, a shortcut he often used to shave 5 minutes off his commute. The snow was already thickening underfoot, silencing the city's usual noise. He walked briskly, his gloved hands buried in his coat pockets, his breath forming clouds in the air. He heard nothing at first. Then footsteps behind him, and then the shuffle of urgency. He turned and saw 3 figures, teenagers maybe. Their faces were half covered with scarves and hoodies, their silhouettes shifting in and out of the mist. "Hey," Ed said, his voice calm but firm. "What's going on?" They didn't answer. The first punch was fast. A jab to the side of his head that sent him staggering against the brick wall. The second came low, a kick to his ribs that dropped him to his knees. Ed raised his hands. "Please, I have nothing you want." But they weren't listening. One yanked the coat from his shoulders, but he clung to it. Another grabbed his wallet and his phone. The third hit him with a metal pipe, a blow to the temple that spun the world sideways. He heard laughter as he slow-slipped into nothingness. A boot kicked against his side. "Let's go," one of them said. "He's dead." And with that they disappeared into the fog. When he opened his eyes, the snow had stopped. Everything was white, the sky, the ground, even his breath. He lay in a heap beside a dumpster, blood frozen to his temple. Pain clawed at every joint. His mouth was dry and his head throbbed like a war drum. He tried to sit up, but his body screamed in protest. He managed to crawl to the edge of the alley where the light hit the ground. No one noticed him. The world moved on, indifferent. He closed his eyes again. The next few days blurred. A shelter took him in. He didn't know his name, couldn't remember where he lived. He tried to speak, but the words made no sense. Names, his own, slipped through his mind like shadows. A nurse at the shelter called him John. Just something to write on the clipboard. He didn't argue. He couldn't. The police came. They asked questions, but without a name, without a lead, there was nothing they could do. He had no ID. His fingerprints weren't in any database, and no one had reported him missing, or so they thought. He slipped through the cracks. Spring came, then summer. He left the shelter. The noise inside made his head hurt. The streets were quieter, more predictable. He learned the patterns of kindness, where to sit, which businesses would leave scraps. He learned to stop trying to speak, just observe. Some nights he dreamed of a woman. She had fire-colored hair and tears in her eyes. He would reach for her, but she would always vanish in the fog. Other nights he dreamed of bright lights, gloved hands, and a blur of voices. But when he woke, the images were gone. He survived one day at a time. One winter, he nearly didn't. But someone, he never knew who, left a blanket beside him and a bag of food. That's how he lived. Years passed and the old man became part of the sidewalk, a fixture in the background of other people's lives. Every morning at 7:45, a young woman would pass him, auburn hair flowing in the wind. She never said anything, just left him food in a paper bag and smiled. There was something in her eyes, something that made his chest ache, but he didn't know why. A baby came into the world with a cry so fierce it silenced the delivery room. Diana held her close, tears of exhaustion and awe streaking her cheeks. Her fingers trembled as she traced the soft curve of her daughter's cheek, the tiny fist that gripped her thumb with startling strength. "You're here," she whispered. "You're really here." She named her Kim, a name that had been whispered to her in a dream weeks before, short, strong, and full of grace. It meant something ancient, golden, noble, a spark in darkness. Diana raised her in a quiet home that was once meant to be shared. The nursery was a peaceful haven, sunlight in the mornings, moonlight at night. A rocking chair beside the window. A coat on the hook by the door that she never moved. Diana told Kim stories about her father, not in sorrowful tones but with reverence. "He was brilliant," she would say, "kind and funny. You have his eyes." Kim grew like wildflowers in spring. She was curious, clever, and full of laughter. She asked early on where her father was. Diana would kneel and say softly, "He didn't leave because he wanted to, sweetheart. Sometimes life takes people away, but I believe he would have moved heaven and earth to come back to us." As the years passed, Kim stopped asking, but she never stopped wondering. School came easy to her. Numbers, letters, pictures, faces. She loved puzzles and patterns, but more than anything, she loved eyes. Diana noticed early on how Kim would stare at people's expressions, trying to read the emotions behind their gaze. "Eyes tell the truth," she once said, at just 8 years old. By high school, she was already shadowing local doctors during the summer. When she was accepted into the State University's prestigious optometry program, Diana cried for an hour straight. Kim worked long hours, juggled classes, and took care of her mother too. They were inseparable, built from the same quiet resilience. She bought her first car from her internship money and rented a small townhouse. By 28, she opened her own clinic, a warm space with soft lighting, watercolor prints, and a tiny fireplace in the lobby. Her mother helped her decorate. On the opening day, Diana brought her a bouquet of white lilies and Ed's old photograph. "He would have been so proud," she said. Kim placed the photo on her desk, a daily reminder of legacy, of love unfinished. Each morning, Kim passed the bakery on 4th Street on her walk to work. The old man was always there. She noticed him the first winter her clinic opened. He sat hunched beneath the same flickering street lamp, wrapped in a jacket that barely held together. He never begged, never spoke. There was something in his silence that unsettled her. The next morning, she brought a paper bag with a croissant and a bottle of water. She placed it gently beside him and offered a small nod. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. Something flickered there, but neither of them spoke. It became a ritual. Every morning, rain or snow, bag after bag. Sometimes soup, sometimes fruit. She never asked his name. He watched her every day, with the haunted eyes of someone trying to remember something just out of reach, and though she couldn't explain it, she began to care deeply. Sometimes she would lie in bed at night and wonder what he had lost. The mornings were often the hardest. Cold seeped through the layers of cardboard and threadbare blankets he had gathered over the years. The bakery's awning dripped with melted frost, the pavement slick with the frozen ice of night. But it wasn't the chill that unsettled him. It was the quiet before the city came alive, the stillness that left too much space for things to surface. Dreams had started to haunt him. At first, vague images, colors, sounds, fleeting impressions. But lately they had shape and warmth. The face of a woman, always the same. Her hair a river of auburn, her eyes brimming with something fierce and tender. She would stand in a doorway, hand on her belly, smiling through tears. Sometimes he heard her voice, "Come back to me." He'd wake gasping, reaching toward the grey sky, but his hands always came back empty. She came again that morning, the young woman with auburn hair. Her coat was green, her cheeks flushed pink from the wind. She knelt slightly to place the paper bag beside him, and as always gave a smile that made the air warmer, if only for a moment. But today something clicked. The way she moved, the arch of her brow. He stared after her long after she walked away, and something stirred in his chest, deep and painful. A pressure, a longing he couldn't remember. That night, the dream returned. He stood in a white room, bright lights above, the smell of disinfectant. A heartbeat monitor beeped steadily. In the corner stood the woman with auburn hair. She held a baby in her arms. She looked down at the child, then up at him. "She has your eyes," she said. He took a step forward, reaching for the baby, and the woman began to fade. "Wait," he whispered, reaching out. But the white of the room dissolved into snowfall, and he was alone again. The next morning the girl came by as usual. The old man looked at her face carefully. The slope of her nose, her eyes. He tried to remember, pressing his hand to his temple, but there was nothing. Kim noticed his movement. Her brows furrowed. "Are you all right?" It was the first time she had spoken to him. He tried to answer, but the words tangled in his throat. He hadn't used his voice in so long, so he just nodded. Kim hesitated, then gave him a gentle smile. "Take care. Merry Christmas." And then she was gone. Christmas morning dawned crisp and pale. A sheet of new snow dusted the rooftops and softened the edges of the city. The air smelled of chimney smoke. Kim stood on her balcony, cradling a mug of cocoa, her auburn hair tucked beneath a knitted hat. The city below moved slowly, sleepily. It was the one day of the year that seemed to excite her. She thought of the old man alone on the sidewalk, in the cold. She didn't know why it felt different this morning. Maybe it was the holiday, maybe it was the dream she'd had. A strange, comforting dream of a hand reaching for hers in the snow. Or maybe it was the way he had looked at her the day before, like he knew her. She found herself packing a larger bag than usual. Ham sandwiches, a slice of cake, and a thermos of hot tea. Then, impulsively, she added a scarf, one of her favorites. A deep blue wool wrap with tiny flecks of silver woven through. The old man was huddled in the same spot, his breath rising in visible puffs. Today, his eyes met hers the moment she approached. She knelt beside him, placing the bag at his side. "Merry Christmas," she said softly. The old man opened his mouth, closed it, and nodded. Kim hesitated, and she asked before she could stop herself, "Would you like to come have lunch with me? I know it's strange, but no one should be alone today." The old man stared at her confused. "It's warm," she added, "and there's plenty of food. You don't have to stay long." Something in his chest cracked open. He didn't understand it, but her voice was a thread in the dark, and he had nothing else to hold on to. He nodded. Kim's home was a small townhouse nestled on a quiet street. The windows glowed with soft yellow light. A wreath hung on the door. As soon as he stepped inside, he smelled roast turkey and roasted potatoes. The old man stood in the foyer, uncertain. Kim helped him take off his coat, then wrapped the new scarf around his neck. "You can sit by the fire," she said gently. "I'll get my mother." He looked around slowly. Photos hung on the wall, a framed diploma with her name, Dr. Kimberly Walters, O.D. The name rang like a bell in the far corners of his mind, and he took a step forward. In the living room, a Christmas tree glittered. Ornaments danced with light, and a baby photo hung from one of the branches, a newborn cradled in a woman's arms. The woman, auburn hair. His knees buckled. Kim rushed to catch him. "Are you okay? Should I call someone?" Diana came down the hallway and froze in place. Her hands trembled at her sides. "Kim," she said, her voice barely audible. "Kim, that's Ed." Kim blinked. "What?" Diana took a step closer, her eyes locked on the man kneeling in front of the tree. "That's your father." The old man looked up, eyes wide, every memory flooded back at once. "Diana," he whispered like a prayer. And then everything collapsed. The silence after Diana spoke was unbearable. Kim stood frozen, her hands still outstretched from when she had helped the old man up. Her heart thudded, confused and disbelieving. "That's your father," Diana said again, barely above a whisper. The old man, Ed, looked up at them, his eyes glossy, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. He looked like a man cracking open under the weight of recognition. "I didn't leave," he rasped. His voice was hoarse, gravelly, unused. "I swear I didn't leave." Kim stepped back, her gaze shifting rapidly between her mother and the stranger who had lived in her periphery for years. Her voice came out choked. "Mom, he can't be. He's homeless. He's been on the street for years." "Look at him," Diana said, tears running freely down her cheeks now. "Look at his eyes." Kim looked, and suddenly she saw him, really saw him. The curve of his jaw, the shape of his brow, the dimple near the corner of his mouth, her own eyes staring back at her. She stumbled backward onto the couch. Her breath caught between shock and something dangerously close to grief. "It doesn't make sense," she murmured. Ed tried to speak, but emotion clogged his throat. He pressed his hands over his face, then slowly lowered them. "I don't remember everything," he said, "but I remember the alley, the cold, someone hitting me over and over, and then nothing." He stared at his hands like they belonged to someone else. I woke up with blood on my face and no name in my head. I didn't know where I was. I didn't even know who I was. I tried to talk to people, but it was like I didn't know how. He looked at Diana. But you? I saw you in my dreams for years, and then I saw her. He turned to Kim, and something inside me started to burn. I thought I was going crazy. Diana moved toward him slowly. She reached out and touched his face, and he leaned into her palm like a starving man finding food. "Ed," she whispered, "you're home." He broke. He let out a sound that was not quite a sob, not quite a sigh, just the sound of a man falling into everything he'd forgotten. Kim stood slowly, her hands trembled. Her heart was thundering. If this is real, if you're really him, then where have you been all my life? His eyes met hers. There was shame there and sorrow so vast it felt ancient. "I wish I could have fought harder to come back to you," he said, "but I didn't even know I was missing. I lived in the corners of the world. I watched people live, but never knew how to be part of them. Until you." "Me?" "You came to me every morning. Your smile, it woke something up inside me. You brought me back one kindness at a time." Tears spilled down Kim's face. She didn't run to him. The pain was too deep, the years too long. But she didn't walk away either. She sat beside him. "Tell me everything," she said. "Everything you remember." And he did. The three of them sat by the fireplace that afternoon as the snow fell and the turkey grew cold. They didn't eat. They shared stories, names. Time, and when Diana wrapped the scarf around Ed's shoulders and laid her head on his chest, Kim rested her head on her mother's lap. No one spoke for a long time. But in that silence, healing began. The days after Christmas passed slowly, like snow melting in the sun. Ed stayed in the guest room. Kim had changed the sheets herself, unsure if the gesture meant forgiveness or simply an offering of comfort. Diana brought him tea each morning, her hands shaking slightly as she set it down. None of them said the word miracle, but it hovered in the air, unspoken and undeniable. Kim moved through the house like a ghost the first few days. Part of her was terrified to believe this man was really her father. Another part of her, a younger aching part, already had. She dreamed about him all her life. She just never thought he'd come from the street outside her office. Ed spent hours staring out the window. He watched the neighborhood children building snowmen, the plows clearing paths, and couples pulling sleds down the street. The world seemed so normal, it felt like a betrayal, like time had marched on and left him behind. The dreams were worse now. They came with clarity. The moment he left Diana's house, the sound of his shoes in the snow, the weight of the surgical bag in his hand, the alley, the flash of fists, the metallic taste of blood. And then the face, Diana's. Kim leaving food. It gutted him. He told them everything he could remember, not all at once, in pieces. Over shared breakfasts, during long silences beside the fire, in moments when the weight was too much to bear alone. Diana listened with the patience of someone who had waited a lifetime, and Kim listened like someone protecting a wound still healing. On the fourth day, Kim came home early. She found Ed sitting at the kitchen table with a pad of paper. He was drawing, something she didn't know he could do. His lines were sure and delicate. On the page was the outline of a face. Diana. Kim walked to the counter, poured herself a glass of water, and leaned against the sink. "Do you want to stay?" she asked quietly. Ed nodded slowly. "If you'll let me." She didn't answer right away. Then she walked over and sat across from him. I think we all deserve a second chance, even if it takes a long time to find it. That evening, they had dinner together, just the three of them. No candles, no decorations, no ceremony. Just lasagna and garlic bread, and soft music playing in the background. They laughed once at a joke Ed made about hospital food, and it felt like breathing. The old man on the street had vanished, and Ed Walters, the man who once disappeared, was coming home. I'd like to take a moment and pause. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Please show a kindness by clicking like and subscribe. It would help our channel so much. Let's continue our story. Ed stood at the edge of the city park, hands buried in his new coat's pockets. It wasn't expensive, but it was warm and fit him well. Kim had insisted even though he had protested. I'm not used to gifts, he'd said. Then it's time you learned, she replied. Now he watched children throwing snowballs, bundled up like puffed marshmallows. Joggers passed, dogs on leashes pulling them eagerly across icy paths. Somewhere a saxophonist played Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas near the fountain. He had lived in this city for years and had never really seen it. At 62, Ed was starting over. Kim had helped him get a checkup, a haircut, and a new pair of prescription glasses. Diana filed for a delayed declaration of identity, and slowly, Ed Walters returned to the world. He was no longer Dr. Ed Walters, chief surgeon at St. Luke's. That man had been lost in an alley years ago. Now he was something else. He took a part-time volunteer role at the local free clinic, just helping, holding hands, reassuring frightened patients, sometimes sorting medical supplies. The nurses called him Mr. Ed. He didn't correct them. He found peace in small things, brewing coffee, planting a few winter greens in Diana's backyard, sketching in the afternoons. Diana was cautious at first. There were days she looked at him like he might vanish again, and he noticed, he understood. But she never pushed him away. She let him stay, and slowly their routines returned. Morning tea, soft conversations by the window, evenings watching old films. She still cried sometimes when she thought he couldn't hear, and sometimes he did too. Kim was the hardest. She loved him. He saw it in the way she remembered to make his toast the way he liked it, in the way she asked him questions about his childhood, in the way she lingered at the door when she left for work. But trust came in cautious steps, and he didn't blame her. She had lived an entire life in the space he left behind, so he gave her space. And one day she called him Dad. Dad, can you pass the salt? He had stared at her for a moment too long, then passed the salt and smiled so wide his face hurt. It was colder than he remembered. Ed stood at the mouth of the alley, the wind biting at his face, the sun weak behind clouds that looked bruised with snow. The buildings leaned like old men against one another, rusted fire escapes coiling above. The same dumpster, the same rusted pipes, the same cracked bricks. It hadn't changed. He stepped forward 1 foot at a time, the snow crunching softly underfoot. His breath came in slow clouds, and for a long time he just stood there remembering. The moment they came for him. He could see it clearly now, the blur of motion, the glint of a knife, the sound of laughter after the pain. It wasn't rage that filled him, it was grief. He crouched beside the wall where he'd woken up all those years ago, placing his hand on the cold brick. His fingers shook. He could still feel the blood on his face, the confusion, the loss, and beneath it all, the worst part, the voice in his head that kept asking, "Who am I?" He closed his eyes. "I forgive you," he whispered. He wasn't talking to them, the boys who had left him for dead. He was talking to the man who didn't fight hard enough to remember, to the frightened, broken shadow who had survived without identity, without family, without purpose. He had hated that version of himself, but now he understood. That man had survived, and because he had, Ed Walters stood here now, older, wiser, and home. He stood slowly, brushing snow from his knees. He looked back one last time, then he turned and walked out of the alley toward the light. Kim had always imagined that if her father came back, it would be like a storm. The front door would crash open. He would say her name, arms open, voice shaking, and it would be a blur of tears, a flood of time made whole. Instead, it was quiet, subtle, a slow thaw after years of frost. She watched him from the kitchen, the sleeves of his sweater pushed up as he peeled potatoes beside her mother. They didn't talk much while they worked, but there was peace in it. Familiarity, like muscle memory stretching back to a life that had almost been lost. She sipped her tea, letting the warmth fill the space inside her where questions still lived. Who would he have been if he hadn't disappeared? Who was he now? And who was she becoming in the light of this impossible reunion? She found herself noticing the small things. The way he hummed softly when he read. The way he triple-checked the doors before bed. The way he smiled at her as if trying not to stare too long, as if soaking her in by degrees. He had never said, "I love you," but he said it in other ways. In the way he cleaned the frost from her windshield before work, in the way he listened deeply when she talked about patients, even the ones who didn't want to wear their glasses, and in the way he remembered how she took her coffee, even though she hadn't told him. One evening, Diana brought out an old box of Christmas decorations. Kim hadn't opened it in years. They sat together by the fireplace, the three of them, lifting out ornaments wrapped in tissue paper. Ed picked up a small wooden figure of a reindeer, worn smooth by time. Kim took the ornament from his hand and held it for a moment. Then she reached out and hung it on the tree. They didn't speak, but something changed. A crack in the wall, a space made for love. Later that night, she found him in the living room sketching. A drawing of her as a baby, nestled in Diana's arms. "How do you remember these things now?" she asked. He looked up, eyes soft. "I saw it on the ornament hanging off the tree." She didn't say anything, just walked over and kissed the top of his head. It was the first time she touched him without hesitation. He closed his eyes, holding the moment like breath. The house was quiet after Kim went to bed. Diana stood in the kitchen, drying the last of the dishes, her fingers working on autopilot while her mind wandered. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the window panes softly. She didn't look up when Ed walked in, but she knew it was him. She could sense him now, the same way she always could. "You never did like drying dishes," he said gently. She gave a soft laugh. "Still don't. Some things don't change." He leaned against the doorframe. "Some do." She put the towel down and finally turned to face him. For a moment they just looked at each other. The silence was heavier than before, but not uncomfortable. "I never stopped wearing my ring," she said. Ed looked down at her hand, at the silver band worn smooth by years of waiting. "I saw it the first day I came in. I didn't know what to say." "I didn't wear it because I believed you were coming back," she whispered. "I wore it because I couldn't bear to let go." Ed stepped closer. "I didn't come back the man I was. I don't even know if I ever will be." Diana studied his face. It was older, weathered by time and hardship, but the eyes, those were still his. The same ones that used to smile across the operating table, that softened when he looked at her over the edge of a shared coffee cup in the morning. "Maybe you're not meant to be him anymore," she said. "Maybe you're meant to be this version, the one who survived, the one who came home. Do you think there's still a place for him in your life?" She didn't answer right away. Then she stepped forward and took his hand. "I think there's a place for us, wherever we are now." He drew in a breath, his hand trembling in hers. I never stopped loving you, Diana, even when I didn't know who I was. Somewhere in the silence, I loved you. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. Then stay, not because we owe each other the past, but because we might still have a future. He nodded, and for the first time in decades, they stood together in the beautiful truth of the present. The city had quieted again, blanketed beneath a new fall of snow that arrived like a secret during the night. It was the kind of morning that made the world feel soft-edged, where sound was muffled and movement slowed, where even time seemed to pause and admire the frost-dusted rooftops and bare-limbed trees shimmering in the pale sunlight. Kim pulled on her coat and gloves at the door, peeking over her shoulder. Are you two ready? Ed appeared first, scarf wrapped imperfectly around his neck, holding a thermos of cocoa. Ready. But I make no promises if there are hills. Diana followed with a small laugh, locking the door behind her. You used to sprint up hills. That was a different life, Ed said, smiling. This one appreciates a good flat sidewalk. They set off through the neighborhood, the snow crunching softly underfoot. Kim looped her arm through her mother's, and Ed walked slightly ahead, pausing now and then to take in shop windows and the park draped in white. Families were out, couples with dogs, children tossing snow in the air just to watch it catch the light. Ed quietly watched them all. Everything felt precious. They reached the small hill at the edge of the park. Kim looked up, then glanced at Ed. Bet you can still make it halfway, she teased. He narrowed his eyes playfully. Are you challenging your old man? Just observing. Diana stepped aside, arms folded, grinning. Well, someone has to hold the cocoa. With an exaggerated groan, Ed stepped forward and began the slow, steady climb. Kim followed, and they laughed, real laughter, bright and ringing against the sky. At the top, they looked out over the city. Rooftops like frosting, chimney smoke drifting, bells from a nearby church chiming the hour. Kim slipped her gloved hand into Ed's. You made it. He looked at her, eyes misting. We made it. Behind them, Diana joined, wrapping her arm around them both. They stood there for a while, the breath of winter on their cheeks, and the warmth of family stitched slowly back together. And in the snow beneath them, 3 sets of footprints marked the path they had taken. Together. March came slowly, stretching across the snow-heavy streets with longer light and warmth. The city, restless from its long winter, began to stir again. Inside the Walters home, the days found their rhythm. Ed had taken to early morning walks. Not far, just enough to feel the world beneath his feet and remember that he belonged to it again. Diana began planting seeds in small ceramic pots lined along the windowsill. Kim juggled patience and paperwork, but still made time for long dinners, laughter and tea on the porch whenever the sun lasted long enough to chase away the chill. One Saturday morning, Kim surprised them both. She laid 3 envelopes on the kitchen table. Open them, she said, beaming. Diana raised a brow. Ed opened his first. Inside was a brochure, a seaside cottage, weathered wood, pale blue shutters, and a porch that faced the sea. Diana looked up. What is this? A vacation, just us for 2 weeks. I already spoke to the clinic. My patients will be covered. Ed blinked. I haven't been on a vacation in, well, ever, Kim teased. Feels like it. Diana looked between them. Are you sure? Kim reached for their hands. I want memories with both of you. Real ones. Not just stories or dreams, and it's time we make some. They said yes, and in early April they packed bags. Scarves, journals, Ed's sketchpad, Diana's garden gloves, and they drove. The cottage was perfect. Waves crashed just beyond the dunes, gulls wheeled overhead. The breeze was fresh. They walked the beach at sunrise, picking up shells. They played board games, and they napped on the porch. One night they built a fire. Kim watched her parents from her seat on the sand. They sat close together, wrapped in one blanket, speaking in low voices. She didn't interrupt. This was their time too. She leaned back and looked up at the stars. The sky was enormous, endless, like the life ahead of them. The last night of their seaside trip arrived quietly. The sun had dipped below the ocean's edge, spilling gold across the water, pulling shadows up from the dunes. Inside the cottage, the windows glowed like lanterns against the twilight. Ed sat alone on the porch, wrapped in a knitted blanket. His sketch pad lay in his lap, but he wasn't drawing. He was simply looking, listening, and breathing. He heard footsteps approaching, soft against the wooden planks. Then Kim appeared. She sat beside him, mirroring his stillness. "You know," she said softly, "for a long time I used to look for you in strangers. I'd glance across train stations, crowds, grocery stores, thinking maybe, just maybe." Ed turned to her slowly, his eyes full. "I used to feel like a ghost," he whispered, "like I was haunting a life I couldn't remember. But you brought me back." Kim smiled. "I think we brought each other back." He reached for her hand, and they sat in silence as the waves rolled in. Inside, Diana was placing the last of the seashells in a glass jar on the mantel. She ran her fingers over each one, remembering the laughter behind them, the slow walks, the ease that had returned to her daughter's smile. She looked out the window at Ed and Kim on the porch, and for the first time in decades, felt the ache of the past finally begin to release its grip. She had let herself love again, and she was no longer afraid of losing it. Later that night, they lit a small lantern and walked it down to the shore. Diana carried the lantern, and Ed and Kim walked beside her. They placed it on the sand and stepped back. The flame danced behind the glass. "For everything lost," Diana said, "and everything found," Ed added. Kim reached down and pressed her palm to the earth. "And for everything still to come." They stood like that for a long time, a family unbroken. Not because the cracks weren't real, but because they had chosen to fill them with gold. 1 year later, it was snowing again. Outside the bakery on 4th Street, a young man in a red coat set up a folding table with hot cocoa and wool scarves, part of the city's outreach project. Across the street, a plaque had been placed in the sidewalk beneath a tree planted that spring. "In honor of those who are unseen. May they always find their way home." A small group gathered nearby, watching as the mayor cut a ribbon. Kim was there, smiling beside her parents. She wore the same green coat she had worn the day she invited a stranger to lunch, except he wasn't a stranger anymore. Ed Walters stood beside her, a hand on her shoulder, Diana's fingers entwined with his. The snow fell and the city moved on around them. But for the three of them, under the white sky, beside a tree rooted in second chances, it felt like time had stopped just long enough to say, "You are home, and this is where you belong." Sometimes we all need shelter, not just from rain, but from the storms of life, the bad days, the hard moments, the times when we feel utterly alone. In memory of everyone who's ever stood in the rain, feeling hopeless. In honor of everyone who's ever stopped to ask, "Are you okay?" In gratitude for the quiet heroes who transform grief into kindness, pain into purpose, and one simple act into a movement that changes lives. May we all be umbrellas for someone else's storm. God bless you.